Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it too. A reminder, as we do every week on this program, that when I say go green, I mean that in a multiple of ways. The two most important ones are first, deep ecology. And I don't mean mere conservationism, that kind of liberal pablum. I mean a recognition of the deep interconnectedness of all of life itself. And whether you come at that from a hard science perspective or you come at it from a deeply eco-feminist spiritual perspective, or like me, you say those are both completely valid ways to see the universe and understand the world itself. I'm here to tell you it is an objective fact that we are all interconnected in this web of life. And whatever we do to that web, we are ultimately doing to ourselves. The second way I mean Green Party is, or the second way I mean green is Green Party. I am a proud and unapologetic member of the Green Party. I ran for Attorney General on the Green Party Texas in on the Green Party ticket in the state of Texas back in 2002, pledging to use that office to revoke the charters of corporations that routinely violate health, safety, environmental protection laws. I was the Green Party nominee for president of the United States in 2004. I proudly was the campaign manager for Jill Stein and Ajamu Baraka back in 2016. So I am a Green Party member to be sure, but I am not a partisan Green. This is not a Green Party rah, rah, rah show. My commitment to the Green Party is one that is clear about the need for a people's party. The corporate capitalists have two parties, the Republican and Democratic Party. I like to say that, the oligarchs who are imperialists like Donald Trump prefer chaos. The neoliberals who prefer empire want order, right? But they're both imperialists. They're both capitalists. They're not going to actually deliver us to the world that we want. And so here we are not a Green Party microphone. We are, however, clear about the fact that on this program, we're coming into a conversation saying we need to educate, agitate, and organize ourselves to build a movement that, yes, would include electoral politics, but would not be merely electoral fetishism. And in that spirit, it is my extreme pleasure to bring back co-host Shane Knight. Shane, how you doing, buddy?
Man, David, I'm doing great, man. It's been a long week, though. We got a lot of snow up here in New York, and us Southern boys really ain't used to that. So,
I know,
but I'm happy to be here. Happy to see you.
A Mississippi boy trying to deal with snow. My heart feels for you. Look at here. I see that we are getting people already coming on. So I want to just acknowledge and apologize. We did have a little bit of technical difficulty, but we're here with you now. If you do want to use the comments section for the live program, feel free to do so. We will incorporate you when we can and as we can. But what we are going to do right now is bring our guest. And I got to say, before, as a lead up to the guest, last week, for those of you who have seen the show live or watched it since, and about 4,000 or 5,000 of you have, co-host Shane Knight made a comment, and he said, we can't just turn towards each other. We're going to have to run towards each other. That really resonated with me. A lot of good positive feedback in the comments and on my Substack. And if you're not yet subscribing to Redneck Gone Green on Substack, do so. And it made me think of my dear friend and colleague and comrade, April Donner. And the reason I thought about April is because April has been a connector, an artist, a storyteller, who has been absolutely committed to building community where people live, work, play, and pray. She introduced me to a social framework called asset-based community development when I first met her several years ago. And I immediately thought of April when Shane said, not just turn to each other to run towards each other. So April was kind enough to agree to come onto the program. So let's bring her into the conversation. April Donner, welcome back to Redneck Gone Green.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, April, I want to jump right in, April, and ask you, when you say community, what do you mean by that?
So when I say community, what it means for me is, you were talking about the web of interdependence, right? That is life. And so for me, that includes, what we see in nature and then expands into our human experience, right? So it's that interconnectedness of life that is mutually supportive and caring. It functions to support the flow of, resources, of people's gifts and energies. And it's a space where, ideally we solve problems together collectively, and we help each other solve our individual problems and realize our common dreams. Um, and I would just say, like, you pointed to, I think community is life, right? It's really how life operates in nature. It's how we operate when we're at our best as humans.
I love that. When we're at our best, because I try to be the best version of myself. I usually fail, April, to tell you the truth. But one thing that I want to ask you about is, in your estimation, does community in this context mean in physical space and time together?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I'm a big believer that place matters and space matters, or physical beings. So we can't ignore our physical proximity in our neighborhoods. And I think that more and more going forward, especially as we see, the rise of fascism, the rise of this kind of oppression and targeting, that we will need to be more and more in true community with our neighbors. And also as we keep experiencing more and more effects of climate change, right? That's where we see all the systems that we set up to come in and help. They mean very little. They do very little, much less than when neighbors know each other and are ready and have their assets and their skills ready at each other's disposal to respond and protect each other. So yeah, I would say for me, and also within the ABCD framework, neighborhoods and geographic place is key. But we also don't discount that other forms of community are important to us, right? You might be a part of a community of other people who practice what you do professionally, or your passion or your hobby that you haven't found as many of right around you. I mean, I would challenge you to find them there, because they're probably there. And we've just become disconnected from our neighbors. But yeah, other forms of community are important, right? Our families might be spread out. That's a form of community. It's the first kind of unit of community, I believe, in society. So yeah, and the principles operate very similarly in how we can be healthy in those kinds of communities and support and thrive with each other. But yeah, I think we need to rediscover the value and the critical nature of geographic place as community.
Right on. I thought that was a brilliant way you answered it, because for me, redneck that I am, I tell people all the time, if you really do any organizing, you best deal with the people with whom you live, work, play, and pray. Like, that's actually where the rubber hits the road, your neighbors. I mean, and that includes, by the way, I got a neighbor like 3 houses down. She proudly sports Women for Trump sign in her yard. And yet every day, whenever I'm out walking Governor Peanut Butter, the best dog in the universe. And I got to say, everybody says they got the best dog. And you know what I say, April? Ain't nobody wrong. So all I'm saying is, I'm out there walking Governor Peanut Butter. Her name is Gina. And I say, hey, Gina, how you doing? We have a nice little pleasant conversation. Obviously, I don't reckon that we share big picture politics, but I'll tell you, she's a friendly enough woman, right? I don't think that she's a defective human. So I'm just saying, that's my neighbor, whether I like it or not, right? And so I think about that all the time. I also want to acknowledge that this Redneck Gone Green is a growing community. I started off with a couple of hundred. I've now got 4,000 subscribers on the Substack, where I do a weekly writing. I'll say it again, y'all. If you are not subscribing to Redneck Gone Green on Substack, do yourself a favor and do so. And I want to be really transparent. We don't put anything behind a paywall. There is an opportunity to throw a couple of shekels into the tin cup if you want to do it. But the point is, this whole program and that Substack is a place to try to build a community where we want people to understand what the heck is going on. Then we want people to recognize that there's actually something that can be done about it, and we spend the program trying to give them examples. So with that in mind, April, I'm going to say, here's what I see happening. I see an ecological collapse that has begun. I see that we are in end stage, not just late stage, end stage capitalism. And I see absolute fascism rising, not just in this country, but globally. And that is a terrifying scenario. And what I want to say is there is, in fact, something that can be done. And it seems to me like building community within our neighborhood using this asset-based community development framework, I think you may be onto something that includes mutual aid but goes much deeper. So, April, I hope that was a setup question, but I want to ask: asset-based community development as a way to build community to confront fascism. Am I on the right track, or
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't be here and still in this framework if I didn't believe it had something to offer. And I think it is not right. It's important, as one of our co-founders, Jody Kretzmann, would always say, ABCD, asset-based community development, is important but not sufficient, right? So it has something to offer. And then what I've been finding, and I'm obsessed with talking with others about these days, is how these other change practices and frameworks and lenses complement it to, together there's a constellation of tools and lenses that we can use together, to not just survive, but to win and thrive, right, ultimately. So, asset-based community development it's really rooted in the way that communities have functioned well for centuries, right? It's not something that was invented when the founders, John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann, gave it that name. But really what they went out and did was discover through a series of deep learning conversations with folks in neighborhoods to find out what they had done to make things better in their place. What were the principles that were underlying those successes? So ABCD is nothing new. And honestly, it's a name for what many often oppressed and marginalized communities still do and are doing to this day, whether it's folks with disabilities or minority communities that have been disenfranchised, right? Ways of making it that don't rely on a lot of traditional systems, but really create them yourself. So I'll say, ABCD first and foremost, it's a way of looking at communities for what's there already. And specifically the gifts and the talents and the passions, and the willingness to act of the individuals that live there. We put a special emphasis on those who, through the systems that have dominated our communities for a while now, who have been labeled as not having anything to offer, right? So folks who are labeled as poor or unhoused or disabled, right? Young people, old people, right? Folks who, because, frankly, they're not kind of this perfect fit for our capitalist system, have been discarded. And ABCD also, really offers a powerful critique that I found really useful of the usurping and the outsourcing to professional systems of helping. And these days it looks a lot like our nonprofit industrial complex, that really segment these folks off from communities and networks of care, where, ages ago, in many cases, they did have a home and they did have a place to give their gifts and to be seen and recognized and valued. But really all of us need that, right? So ABCD is saying, a healthy community is one where everyone is needed and included for what they have to offer. And then we are in relationship of mutual care where we can work effectively together. We know what our assets are, and we have a sense of collective agency and ability to together come up with our own solutions for whatever problem, or as well as whatever vision, we're confronting together in our neighborhood. And that could include, individual issues. Like I saw someone in the chat is struggling with losing their home. Right. That can look like folks circling around someone and saying, OK, how can we support you? How can we use our networks and our assets? Do we have a place to offer you to stay? But also, what other things do we have at our disposal beyond just the traditional helping organizations? Right. So it's really homemade and home cooked solutions. And I'll just add one more thing. A lot of it is retraining folks in these helping professions, because they have often been trained out of seeing communities as having their own capacity, as having their own solutions. And they often come in with their own agendas. Just we often say, my colleague Ray often says, it's, we so often come into communities with our hands full, ready to, we just really need to give our resources and our programs and these solutions, rather than our hands empty and calling forth the gifts, the assets, the ideas, the solutions, and often the existing under the radar activities of community members themselves.
So, it occurs to me, April, as I'm hearing you describe this, I'll put my, I am a socialist who goes into bars, right? And talks to people about it without trying to, pick fights, but actually to engage in what I would call consciousness raising, helping people to understand how the world really operates. And what I would say is what you're describing is what the economists call use value, producing things just for use. Like if there's a human need, this is the way humans have always engaged in commerce and producing goods and services. It's for use. What capitalism does is to say, no, you produce goods and services as commodities that will be bought and paid for at a profit. And then you treat labor itself as just one more commodity that's bought and paid for. You do the whole thing on an open market, and you say in everything about all of commerce should always be about profit maximization, right? And so that's why capitalism is a cancer as a political economy that's destroying the planet. And I would argue that what you just described was a very practical way of saying, let's think about community as meeting our collective needs, where everybody is pitching in and doing it together. So I'm wondering if what I said is making sense. Am I oversimplifying things? But the way I'm thinking about it is, asset-based community development seems to be a way to assess what's already there and try to facilitate people's gifts and talents to be used where they're needed.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to jump in right here because I have a question about this. As I was reading through not only the website, but everything I could dig up about asset-based community development, the one thing that kept sticking out in my head is, like, I keep thinking about it as a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of a scenario, where if the guy who's a plumber has an ability to do something and the guy that's a carpenter, and they can swap trades back and forth. And that links back to what, April, you were saying in the beginning, like people have been doing this forever. And then David just brought in the whole idea of it's a socialist idea, right? Right now, what we're facing in this country is a dissolution of all the safety nets, all the protections and regulatory processes that are in place to keep us as a citizenry safe. And I kept thinking of different ways in which communities could come together to sort of not necessarily holistically substitute those entities that have been existed forever, but I'm wondering, do you envision a way in which this whole framework could potentially, at least for the time being, to get us through this crazy, chaotic, tumultuous hump of the fucking current administration, to sort of bridge the gap between what we're facing, which I just mentioned, the dissolution of all of these things, into something that is going to be better as communities, as groups of people looking out for one another, meaning creating our own sense of safety nets, our own macro economies, and things like that. Is that something that this whole concept lends itself to developing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the other thing that ABCD really pushes for, right, is the relocation of power into the hands of community members themselves, right? To define what needs to be done, to drive it ourselves. And one thing I've been delighted to find is how many, I've been on a journey for the last 2 or 3 years to really consciously step outside of just the ABCD field and discover these other parallel streams of practices, these sister streams that many have been going on for many years. And we just haven't integrated, I would say, well enough yet, probably, into like our methodology. And I think there's a lot to be shared on both ends. But, I think there are many examples that complement what ABCD has to offer that we can also plug in, right? So things like worker-owned cooperatives, a lot of, models
Exactly.
institutions becoming democratized through community wealth building models, through participatory democracy, through participatory budgeting, right? And so, it's really, it is this cornucopia of tools and practices and lineages that we can draw from. What I've found ABCD particularly offers that's useful is that concept of, we need to really center, we say citizens, but that's not meant as a legal status, and now more than ever, but it's more, those who are acting in concert with others. That's a definition that we draw on. So, and really moving to see ourselves as citizens, as producers of what we want to see together with others, rather than as clients, because we've become so conditioned to think that, addressing homelessness or addressing whatever is happening, environmentally, or, any list of things is up to some organization that claims it as its mission. It's really about taking it back into our own hands and saying, hey, let me see what I can do with my neighbors or with a group that might already exist that's really driven by the community. And we're seeing now, more than ever, right, with this funding freeze that was, and, it's threatened, and we'll see if it goes through, how vulnerable these nonprofits are, right?
So I gotta say, April, I want to jump in, because what you're describing to me sounds like what I know of as old-fashioned mutual aid.
Yeah. And one thing, I think that mutual aid in its ideal form is mutual. One thing I often see is that when we try to set up systems of mutual aid, we often ends up with kind of a charity model, right? Where and sometimes it's necessary. You just got to get resources out there to people. But what I've found through the ABCD practice and so many different, stories I've witnessed and been a part of, is that deep work of weaving lives together, right? So it's truly mutual, so I'm in relationship with you. And so, if I have an issue, that becomes part of your life, and you have something to offer to help me. But also, then it has a life of its own, right? It's not just, oh, here's someone's Cash App account and I can send it to them, and I don't really know them beyond that. I think those structures can be really useful in a crisis. But this is that long-term true relationship building that can not only, handle in crises, but also give people pathways to find their purpose, right? To find their partner, these beautiful things about living, right? To come together and, if someone loses a family member, you have folks who come around them and build economy together. So yeah, it's mutual aid, but deep mutual aid, right?
Right on. No, look, I appreciate you drawing the distinction between a charity function and genuine solidarity, and really grappling with that. I also want to acknowledge that there's been a really great conversation going on in the chat. And one I want to lift up is Dave Petrovich, who's a frequent commenter. Really appreciate Dave, who wrote in democracy where we work and democracy where we live. And for me, that really, that's a simple but yet very profound way to describe this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing, so my mentor, John McKnight, who was one of the people who coined ABCD as a frame, but again, it's existed for centuries before he named it. But he would always tell the story of Alexis de Tocqueville, who was sent over during the time of the French Revolution by France to study American democracy. And one of the things he came back and reported was that what makes American democracy robust, in particular that he noticed, was Americans' tendency to form associations. So when they find something they don't like, or they want to make something happen, they don't go just to the government. They don't go to all these necessarily existing institutions. They pull together with 4 or 5 other people that they know care about the same thing, and they make shit happen. and he said, and what we also know is important about this power of association at that grassroots level is that that's one of the first things that fascist and authoritarian governments seek to dismantle, right? It's the right to assemble. So that's, it's not a silver bullet, right? But it's a very, very important power that we have. Yeah.
So I also want to lift up Michael Nugent, who is somebody that I met actually in Vermont at an Eco-Socialism from Below gathering. Michael writes in, I work in peer support, and sometimes we say that peer support is the actual way that people survive for millennia without the state. ABCD, our asset-based community development, seems like something similar, mutual support within communities without an interfering entity. How's Michael doing so far, April, in terms of understanding what you're talking about?
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful. And you know, I think too, right? We don't have to throw babies out with the bathwater, right? These institutions that have formed, and I've worked with so many different nonprofits and, you know, helping agencies that, you know, they're filled with really caring, really skilled people, right? And these are resources. So part of it is, how do we retool these structures so that they are at the service of community, right? We say, how do they become assets? How do they work in support of community power? And it's become a buzzword, right? Like community centered. And but a lot of times you see these things are said to be community centered, but there's a lot deeper they can go in these professionals learning how to really, you know, come in with humility and first find out, okay, what are these folks doing? What do they care about? There's really beautiful processes like asset mapping, practices of investing in neighborhood connectors to really go discover and mobilize in a really appropriate and authentic way who's here, what do they want to do, and then connecting them up with each other. And then also working as gappers with these institutions and acting as translators sometimes. By the way, my mom also is on here. Hello, Mom.
Oh, that's lovely.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Look, people who know me know I will say it all the time. I am a proud and unapologetic mama's boy. I am who I am so much because of the love and affection and loving discipline that I got from my mama and my mama and my papa. So I will never fault a guest for saying howdy to mama.
Well, and if I can add just a real quick thing, right? You know, people are saying like, how do we do this? And I do want to point to the practice of finding and supporting connectors. And if you are a connector, so my mother was one of the original connectors in my life. My grandmother, her mother was the other, Polly Williams, who's no longer with us, who's with the ancestors. But, you know, my mother is someone who, you know, I would always say she could get someone sharing like their deepest desire or sadness by the time we got through the checkout line at the grocery store, right? She just brings it out of people and they feel safe with her and they share. And then she's incredibly good at connecting people with each other. Right. And so I've always seen that the power of that. And there's people like that in every single community, in every single neighborhood. And oftentimes that, you know, that role has been downplayed and these connectors are not as activated as they could be. But there's so many amazing stories that I have been able to witness and learn about when these folks are, as an institutional practice, these folks are valued by local organizations. And it could be a church, it could be a health agency, it could be a city. So in Edmonton, there's a whole program called the Abundant Community Initiative that invested in neighborhood connectors to go find block connectors and empower them to go meet their neighbors, invite them to meet one another, but then also grow power with each other around things that they cared about and solving problems together. So there's, you know, I don't want to say we should just, you know, completely ignore these institutions, these professionals that are out there, but let's retool them, you know, let's
right on.
Yeah.
In fact, I got to say, speaking of how much I love my mama, and it puts me to mind of being a little boy and how, look, I'll just say it, how absolutely mesmerized I was by Mr. Rogers. And when I sometimes talk about toxic masculinity and what it means, and people try to like gig me a little bit, right? Almost always white men about what that means. Well, what's non-toxic masculinity? And I always like to say, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers was a man who actually embodied a fierce love and gentleness and a kindness. And I'll never forget this quote. He said, this is Fred Rogers, not me, but I wish I was this clever. Fred Rogers said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And what's interesting to me is they don't have to be professional institutional helpers. There are many people who just can't help themselves. They are the kind of folk who are looking to actually help. So I'm going to actually push you, because I know Ashley, for example, is in the chat. She is one of the many people who have said, how do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
So, April, I'm going to give you the floor. Take as long as you want. I want you to say to somebody who lives in a community who is hearing this and is saying, doggone it, April and Shane and David, they're onto something. I want to try it. So you would say to them,
so if I'm speaking to, if this is someone who's a community member, they're asking, like, as a neighbor in my own community, what can I do? Really, the first step is to meet your neighbors, and also just start learning what's going on in your neighborhood. So one of the easiest ways I found, now I'm a connector person, so I have this thing in me where I love the challenge and that weird nervousness when you go knock on someone's door. Like, I thrive on that. So I'm speaking as someone who has that, like, as a strength. So one thing that you can do, but I think the key is to really play to your own strengths and your gifts and talents. So for myself, one thing that I do is I love to host. And that's something that oftentimes neighbors, they might not take as kindly to someone like knocking on their door and saying, hey, I just really want to know you and know all about what your gifts and talents are. But, if you are leaving a little note or knocking and letting them know that you're going to have a game night, or you're just going to have like a little drinks thing with neighbors or a potluck, people are often a lot more open to that. And, some people might not be the first time, but maybe the third time, they end up coming around. So really start with that. And then creating a space where, people can organically get to know each other. One thing that I'm experimenting with now that I found to be an incredible tool is something called the Offers and Needs Market, which the Post Growth Institute has made popular. So that's something that you can start to introduce maybe after you have a few of those gatherings and people have gotten to know you. What I find is that, when you have those natural spaces, like, I can just kind of speak authentically, right? I don't have to come in with a program and an agenda, but as I naturally talk to people about what I do and what I care about and what's on my mind over food or drinks or games, I can sort of share, like, why it's important to me to know my neighbors, and I can start to share some ideas that I have and also hear what other people have. So back in Indianapolis, where I lived before I moved here to Chicago, I was just doing that. And, sometimes I meet neighbors just walking out in the street and being extra friendly. Sometimes I go and invite them to things. You just use your creativity and find a way. But, I was having one of those conversations, and my neighbor, Amanda, and her husband, Danny, were talking to me. And Danny was from, I think it was Alabama. And I was talking about, it'd be cool to get neighbors together. He's like, yeah, we used to do this thing called the Dauphin in my neighborhood with our family. And it was drinks on a driveway on Fridays, and the neighbors came up with this thing, and people would just be understood. One neighbor would host.
Well, it just sounds like drinking beer in the front yard is what it sounds like.
Yes, right. And so many
meet
people
you down at the cul-de-sac.
Yeah, exactly. And it was simple. It wasn't a heavy lift for anyone. People just showed up with their drink. No one had to even provide all the drinks. People brought their own chairs, and it was just understood on Fridays, that's where you would go, right? So it could be something simple. It can be home, like a home cooked idea. So that's what I did. And I heard them bring that up, and I was like, oh, I love your idea. Like, that's better than mine. Let's go with that. So we started doing that, and really, we're able to build a buzzing little hub in our corner of the neighborhood, of neighbors who started really showing up for each other. Including one of my neighbors, Brittany, who, she got connected with the other mothers, didn't really know them otherwise. We did cross a lot of like race and class boundaries in that. And when she found that her apartment was way too small, but she couldn't raise the funds to move to a larger place, we started a GoFundMe, and a bunch of the neighbors pitched in who were, better means financially. But not only that, right? Like she really found community with these other mothers as well, just in talking about, parenting and, things like that. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to actually remind folks that you're listening and or watching Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb, joined by co-host Shane Knight, Mississippi boy now living in New York City, and April Donner. April is a natural connector, a dear and cherished friend, so I want to honor and acknowledge that, and is an expert at the practice called asset-based community development. And April has made the proposition that we can do resistance by building community. So, April, I'm going to ask you, can we do asset-based community development to protect undocumented workers from ICE? Can we protect transgendered people when they're being attacked? I mean, and this is not it's not a challenge to you. It's a genuine inquiry. Can we use this framework in more direct, acute need situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So what and actually I was just talking to, I'm trying to get him to share more information with me, but my friend Amaha Selassie, who I know you know as well, David, who's both a solidarity economy and an ABCD practitioner, amazing organizer over in Dayton, Ohio. He was sharing work that they've been doing in their community to really form circles of care around the most vulnerable members of the community who are being targeted by ICE. So I think what that looks like, right, is and the way that he's able to do that, I know, because I know about his work, is that they've already been cultivating these relationships within the community. So folks know each other, right? So they know who those people are. There's relationships of trust, right? So that if you start asking, if you start asking questions, which I'm new in my neighborhood, right? Like, and I'm white, and I'm mostly like Latinx neighborhood. So people don't trust me as much, but if you've been there for a while and the connectors are active and they can, team up with agencies and organizations that are focused on, immigrant right and protection, right? You can really form a coalition that is also very grassroots and that neighbors can plug into and say, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can, I think there is something I was learning about, neighbors can say, hey, I'm willing to have, if someone wants to give me power of attorney, I will do that over the children in this family, so that if the parent gets deported, then the children don't have to be sent as well. Right? Someone can be here to take responsibility for them. And that's a way to, at least in this moment, not have the worst case scenario happen in that situation. Right. But also communication, right? You can have safe systems of communication for whatever need or danger is arriving in the moment within this, ecosystem of care and trust. So that's one example. Like, I'm honestly, like, I'm on the hunt for other examples of how this is playing out. But even for myself, what I'm finding is that this particular issue coming down the pike now in the last 2 weeks, it's really put a fire under my butt to go out and find out, who are the really nuanced, invested, community-centered organizations in my neighborhood that I can show up and just say, like, hey, like, how can I support? And then I can also conduit for my neighbors to give them that information too. Because a lot of people are just like, what the fuck do we do? It's disaster. But
a lot of people who are watching and listening to Redneck Gone Green are asking that same question. And I also want to take this opportunity first to lift up in my own local community, Centro del Pueblo, which is a group. It's immigrants who have organized themselves to advocate for themselves, and they do invite support and help from the community. And they're already running a series of Know Your Legal Rights. They ran a ballot initiative. We have the strongest sanctuary city ordinance in the country that literally instructs the local police, both sheriff and city police departments here in Humboldt County, California, to not engage with the ICE folks who do the raids. And get this. They mobilized the community to show up and had the Board of Supervisors affirm. So we won that, right? Including in very conservative areas. But get this, they just had the Board of Supervisors affirm that this is the local law and instructed the sheriff to make sure to follow the sanctuary ordinance that was passed by the voters. And that included, it was unanimous. And there's one person who's known as the local, Trump fella who's on the city council. But because of the level of community support, it's one of those examples where I am not an electoral fetishist, but elections do actually have consequences. And it's why I've always been a supporter of the ballot initiative process, where we can actually legislate democratically. And so that was one thing I just wanted to lift up. The
Mhm.
other thing, April, again, Michael Nugent in the chat just asked a question that I think
Mhm.
is really on point. Michael asked, what is the relationship between asset-based community development and the community wealth building model through anchor institutions?
Yes. So I love that question. Thank you, Michael, for asking it. So I am still a student, right, of many of these others change frameworks. I will say that like off the bat. But I actually managed to have a conversation with John McKnight last year. He passed away in November, but a few months before that was able to talk with him, and I had been learning more about community wealth building and Gara Parowitz's model, and they actually kind of knew each other. Um, what I came to understand through this conversation with John, and then also my own studies, is that ABCD offers a really strong model and emphasis for making sure you're looking to communities and especially people in neighborhoods themselves to have homegrown solutions and draw upon their own resources to see themselves as the source, of many of the skills and talents that need to be utilized to solve problems. What community wealth building I see brings is showing us how can we restructure organizations that interface with communities, so that they can be democratized, right? And so there's models to look at there, that I think are very powerful and important, and within the ABCD to lift up, okay, here are ways that we can unleash and unlock those capacities on that very hyper local, nuanced level, within neighborhoods, so that together they can actually work the most effectively as possible, to address issues, to build a different system, at the end of the day. So I don't see them as, they overlap, but then they each have something very valuable to offer to each other. And my thing is just like these worlds need to be better connected, right? So we can see that and not feel like it's a competition between frameworks.
Well, I love that. And I have seen you repeatedly work really hard to be that bridge between different movement spaces. So I do want to lift up, April Donor, that you have, like you walk the walk. You don't just talk the talk about doing that. And in that spirit, I wanted to ask you about the Golden Institute. And if I'm mispronouncing that, please let me know. But drop that into the chat, into the comment section for folks who want it. We'll make sure that it goes out. But I did put it in the Substack writing. But tell us a little bit about the Golden Institute and how you see that playing in to not just the asset-based community development model, but community as resistance.
Yeah. So I just had the great honor to join the Golden Institute team a couple of weeks ago, but they've been in my universe for a year or two through my good friend John Ziegler, who's at DePaul University. So he's been connecting me in with their work. They're rooted in asset-based community development as well. So their founder Travis Raymond, and he was his mentor was the other co-founder of ABCD, so Jody Kretzmann, who passed a few years ago. And together with Diane Golden, they formed Golden in 2002. And their focus is really on developing grassroots leaders. And they utilize this asset-based lens for community building so that, when you're going out and saying, hey, I want to make a change in my community, you're really learning to start with the assets in your community. You're really learning to look at that neighbors and everyone, including those that have been labeled as not, as just being needy, right? Or just needing help. Everyone is having something to offer. And that part of your job is to build pathways and build spaces where those gifts and talents can be realized and where people can really step into their own power. So Golden offers both a global fellowship and a Chicago fellowship called the Chicago Peace Fellows, which have been running for, I think it's, I'm new to the team, so I don't have like the elevator pitch down, but several years now they've been running this fellowship and really improving it every year. It's honestly, it's one of the best kind of long-term training processes that I've seen that also results in really building a beautiful community of practice that lasts. So everyone who goes through the fellowship joins this global network of other people who are out there in their communities and their neighborhoods, really living these principles and growing together. And it's, really rooted in a commitment to equity and justice, building these from local to global and learning together. So we just launched applications for the Golden Global Fellowship and the Chicago Peace Fellowship, which are due by February 20th. So if anybody's interested, please, follow the link, and it'll give you little bubbles where you can look into either. And yeah, it's just a really, really beautiful organization and beautiful network.
Fantastic. So listen, I'm really loving this conversation. I'm also loving a lot of the chat, and I'm going to lift up Patricia, who writes, is, quote, wealth building doable without being a part of the capitalist process? If not, she says it's not actually viable. So that has provoked me for some comments, but I want to see, April, first, if you've got any reactions to that.
Oh, I really want to hear what you have to say.
Wait, thank you for asking, April. Look here. I would say this. There is a misunderstanding that the only way that you can build wealth is through the capitalist model. Remember that, and this is a hat tip to Abraham Lincoln and so many others before us, but only human labor actually creates wealth. What the capitalist economic framework does is hoard wealth, and it hoards decision-making authority, and it hoards power, right? Capitalism has a very simple definition. And in fact, I challenge folks, go right now open another tab, because I want you to stay on this program, but open another tab and see if this definition of capitalism is not basically correct, right? One, the private ownership of what is called the means of production. And that means the factories, the farms, the ranches, like everything that creates goods and services is privately owned. Number two, that the labor itself is just another commodity that's to be bought and paid for on the open market. Three, that everything in commerce is supposed to be done to maximize profit. Fourth, this idea of the market will allocate all of the things, right? So that economic system called capitalism incentivizes unlimited growth. It assumes that it is morally and ethically acceptable for there to be the private ownership of the things that we need to survive. And I reject that. I actually think that is a completely ridiculous way to organize a society. And it's why we have created billionaires while there are literally children starving to death in the richest country the world has ever seen. And damn it all, if that is not the most immoral, unethical, downright evil system to allow billionaires while children go to bed hungry, I don't know what is. So the point is, capitalism is merely a way to do economics. There are other ways to do economics. It's why I embrace the solidarity economy framework, which actually posits and places the need to create or to provide human needs first and foremost, right? And we could go through it, but all I want to say, Patricia, is that this idea that you can only build wealth in capitalism is just wrong. We can debate whether or not you think capitalism is the better system, right? But I do not. And I think that throughout all of human time, wealth has been built outside of enclosure and capitalist framework, period. So that's how I would answer it, April. How about you, Shane? You want to jump in here?
I mean, I think you took the words right out of my mouth and did a very good job of doing so.
Right on. And actually, it's funny for those of you following the chat. Patricia agreed with me, except for number 2. She said, "In fact, the work that makes profit is stolen, wage theft." Then Patricia goes on to say, "I'm a Marxist." So,
Mhm.
Patricia, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you asked a good provocative question. And to me, this conversation is actually underscoring that even as we think about things like protecting the most vulnerable in the community, whether it's a transgendered person or an undocumented human, because let's just be clear, like, migration, I would say, is a human right as well. Like, humans would not exist if we had not actually migrated. We would not have evolved as a species, right? So all I'm getting at is you can have this desire to do direct action to actually protect people immediately, and it is you can do this asset-based community development model, and you can be post-capitalist, right? That one of the things that I'm really appreciating is the pluralistic approach that April Donor is taking into this entire conversation. I don't want to put words in your mouth, April, but that's how I'm experiencing your conversation.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's and it's funny because it's been very full circle for me, right? My journey. I was introduced to really thinking outside of our current system when I was a teenager. So grateful to Mr. Funk, my high school teacher, who had us read Howard Zinn, and then in college,
Wait, what? You had a high school teacher who assigned Howard Zinn?
yes, and his name was Mr. Funk.
Mr. Funk. Couldn't get any better. Hey, looky here, y'all. If
Yeah.
you don't know the reference that April Donor just made about Howard Zinn, arguably he's a people's historian. May the goddess bless him. He also has passed on to the ancestors. But his book, the People's History of the United States, told from the perspective of ordinary folk, the people, as opposed to the famous folks that we're told who actually make history. As a people's historian, Howard Zinn's book, The People's History of the United States, tells the story of this country in a way that will completely reframe everything. And so the fact that Mr. Funk assigned you Howard Zinn as a history student, no wonder you're ahead of the game, April.
And it was such an early lesson as well, an institutional and societal behavior, because our social studies teacher, some of us started citing him in our papers for her, and she then told us that we were not allowed to cite Howard Zinn in our papers. It was like, okay, this is interesting. But and then I read Marx and Engels in college, and that just like put this other seed. So there was this really big questioning of the system, and I was in different activist spaces. And then when I found ABCD, there was this part of me that was always wanted to fight and always wanted to question systems. But I found such a beautiful home, right? And this lovely kind of space of community building, which is such a passion of mine. And for a long time, I felt like, okay, this is the way we can completely transform society, right? If we dig into this, and if we kind of take back the functions of community from these institutions and professionals, and rediscover one another and become interdependent again. But I had, speaking of pluralism, and David, how you and I got to know each other through Resist and Build network process, was at our in-person gathering in Richmond 2 years ago, sitting with Neil McEnroy of the Democracy Collaborative. And he's like, oh yeah, I've heard of ABCD. And he's, got a great accent. He's really fun to talk to.
Oh, that Scottish brogue, you didn't do it justice.
I know. No,
I heard of the ABCD, of course, across the Atlantic.
Yeah, it's traveled. But he really had a candid critique, which was that it doesn't offer a critique of capitalism. It doesn't, it looks at horizontal power and building that, but it doesn't look at the vertical lines of power that are also shaping our world. And I was like, man, you're right. I'm actually not going to argue with you. And that set a lot of things in motion for me about, and that's why we need to blend. That's why we don't need to just stick and silo off into one methodology.
Well, looky here. This time is just flying by. You did mention Resist and Build. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to share with viewers and listeners what Resist and Build is. Then I want to let you know you're going to have all the time you need to wrap up. But you did tickle or tease us with resist and build. So April, I'm going to ask you, what the heck is resist and build?
Yes. So resist and build is a process that grew out of many change makers, including you, David, who before my time really decided to create a cross-sectional movement space for really uniting around system change, systemic transformation through relationship building, collective action, learning from each other in a pluralistic way. But it's really rooted in the agreement, right, that we need a post-capitalist reality, right? And that's what we need to be building. I found it to be an incredible space where, no one's trying to convince you that you have to do their thing, but we really are respecting and learning from another. And, together, I think kind of finding our way towards what does that look like to really work in concert and poke outside of our focused siloed streams because we have to be coordinated if we're actually going to win this new world. So we have we're mostly like nationally based within the US and have various ways of connecting with each other. There's a listserv, but we're also planning an in-person gathering in Atlanta in May. So would love everyone to come that can. It's May 2nd to the 5th, but there's more public workshops in the middle of those days. And so that'll be a chance to really converge our movements together for system change and figure out how do we really scale these ideas and coordinate our efforts to get beyond capitalism.
Well done, April. Listen, and again, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and the time really did just fly by. But I do want to give you the opportunity, April, for any final and closing thoughts for you as a guest.
There's so many beautiful quotes, and I'm not one of those people that remembers quotes, but I really do believe that the way through to liberation is through community. And that's both individually, right? It's the place where we find love, and we find support and we find safety, and we can work things out. And especially for folks who haven't had the privileges, like, I've had so many, right? Like I've been told how gifted I am my whole life, and, relationships my parents have used, that they had to help me, find my jobs and, to help me grow. And, it's the way that we can really provide that for everyone. But also to face the shitstorm that we're really all looking into right now. We really need these structures, and we really need to be in practice. I would say, the other thing I've really been chewing on is that, right, capitalism comes from, a need to other. There's a beautiful podcast, Upstream, that I think it was the end of year last year, where they really kind of tried to go upstream to what brought us to this economic system. And, perhaps at the root of that was this willingness to make someone other than us. Right. So I'm willing to extract from this person rather than, really have a healthy exchange with them, because I see them as other than myself. So I think community is a way for us to really unlearn and deprogram ourselves from the deep patterns that allow us to treat others in that way, and, just keep participating in a system that does that. So Margaret Wheatley also came out with a beautiful book. I will look it up and we'll share it in the follow-up. But it really looks at, the way to do this work is to step into it and then pay attention to what comes up between us as we're doing it, because all of these methodologies and principles and processes are great. But for me, a lot of this work is about stepping into the messiness of it, and learning ways to address conflict, to be authentic, to stay with the discomfort, because so many of us just don't have those muscles anymore. We've not learned them as we've grown up, and we're going to need them more than ever, especially to both resist, what's coming at us and what's going to be coming at us more and more, but also to build, this alternative that we need that's got to be rooted in the right things, right? Because if we don't, we're just going to replicate the same shit with a new name. I'll leave it there.
I thought that was
Shane?
good. I wanted to, yeah, thanks, David. I wanted to say one thing, April, what you just said about sitting with the discomfort. I recognize the Buddhist tendency or tenets behind that concept. Something I deal with a lot and have had to really call on lately because of everything happening with this scenario that we're in. And you're right. They're muscles and skills that people have lost or never developed or didn't know they existed. And I want to thank you for this lovely conversation about community. I have been preaching to people without a framework like ABCD for the last several years about the importance of community. And I want to thank you for all that you do and look forward to working with you again. And to everybody out there, I want to thank you for being a part of the Redneck Gone Green community, and tertiarily the Democracy at Work team and all that they do. And thank you for all of your support. We couldn't do any of this without it. And there are many more things that I'm afraid we're going to be able to say that about in the near future. So y'all take care. Look forward to seeing y'all again next week.
All right. Thank you so much, Shane. And so, April, I'm gonna add my voice to the chorus of deep appreciation that Shane kicked off. Thank you so much for coming on to this program. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you also for the clarity of vision that you shared and engaging, including with the folks in the comment section. Folks, I want to conclude two things. One, join us next week. We'll have representatives from Native Roots Network on to talk about the framework that they're using in a deep red Trumplandia part of rural Northern California, and we'll try to learn from them. I also want to conclude with June Jordan, a famous poet. A lot of other people have gotten credit for this line, but June Jordan is the one who originally wrote, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." I'm going to get to the point where I can do that entire poem, but as we conclude, I want you to remember that it's up to us together. Nobody is coming to save us, y'all. It's up to us, and we can do it. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Peace.